Bob, who better to talk to about these very latest developments? Are you surprised that we seem to be seeing more civilian targets being hit now in Ukraine?
No, not necessarily. Good morning, Tom. Good morning to your viewers and listeners. Some kind of revenge attack was inevitable. I'm actually quite surprised of the general feebleness of them, because the Kerch Bridge was a serious and highly strategic attack. And what the Russians seem to be doing is finding targets in various cities. And there's no indication, I certainly haven't seen an indication, that those targets are strategic in any sense, or indeed are going to change the course of the war. And fundamentally, that's the problem here, that there's very little that Putin can do to change the course of the war, apart from winning on the battlefield. And he seems to be incapable. His army, his generals seem to be incapable of doing that.
Really, really important for people in this country, indeed in Europe, and perhaps the rest of the world too. We're seeing extremely high energy bills, of course. The government has committed to keeping those energy bills down for 2 years. Now, if this war ends in the next 6 months or goes on for another 2 years, will be very, very material for how many billions, tens of billions, this government has to borrow to keep those energy bills down. In your assessment, could this war be done within the next 6 months? We're 8 months in, the Ukrainians are making advances, but it gets a lot harder in that cold Eastern European winter.
I mean, Tom, two very good questions. Firstly, about energy bills, and secondly, about the length of the war. The length of the war could carry on for another year, 18 months. Although the Russians, very difficult to see how the Russians can win. The last phase of the war ended in September when the Ukrainians overran positions in Kharkiv and have started to overrun positions in Kherson in the south. So in the east in Kharkiv, in the south in Kherson. So this stage of the war, the Ukrainians can now sense victory, but there is a long way to go. So I think even the Ukrainians think this war is going to last until at least the end of next year, and then maybe into 2024 as well. The potential use of tactical nuclear weapons, I thought might come by the spring. I was with Ukrainian MPs at conference in Birmingham last week, and they were saying, actually, no, these decisions could be made by January, potentially, depending on how badly Putin's war is going. So there is permanent pressure now on those Russian positions, and I don't think that's going to ease. And just bringing more people into an army which has effectively become a rabble, you just create a bigger rabble. So the Russians need to do incredibly detailed, difficult structural work to try to make their armies and their logistical supply function better. When it comes to prices, interestingly, you're starting to read now the idea that actually there's becoming an equilibrium in liquid gas markets and energy markets. So it's not impossible, to put an optimistic view on this, that the expense of decoupling has now happened, or a significant element of it has happened, and you may see energy wholesale market prices for energy and for liquid natural gas start to decline from next year onwards. So it might be that inflationary hit, the energy price hit, is, I hope, less than we think, and that may start to come down by next spring, potentially. But let's see what's happening. Let's see what happens.
That's a really, really significant point to raise, because, of course, many people have been talking about the idea that the West should seek some sort of negotiated solution in Ukraine, that this might be somehow better for energy costs in the West. Judging by that assessment, and indeed by the incentives that sort of negotiated settlement would proffer to Putin and his regime, it doesn't sound like the best idea.
Well, negotiating the end of this war is up to the Ukrainians, not up to us. And although we may have our red lines and we can always stop supplying that weaponry to Ukraine, fundamentally, they are fighting for their territory, and we recognise their right to defend their territory, to buy arms, and to put armies in the field to defend their country against, let's face it, the first major illegal invasion of a country since World War II. So it's up to the Ukrainians to decide. Would I be nervous about the Ukrainians re-invading Crimea? I would actually, yes, because I think you're much more likely to get a potential nuclear response from the Russians. So we need to be within the bounds of what we think is going to achieve a Ukrainian victory without catastrophically widening this war. And there is a fine balance. And just to say Putin is bluffing is not good enough. We need to understand that we don't know if Putin is bluffing when he's using tactical nuclear weapons or when he's threatening to use tactical nuclear weapons. But what we need to do is assume he's not bluffing, so we can work our way back from that to work out the best way to ensure that Ukraine wins, but Ukraine wins without sparking a wider conflict. And that is a very nuanced point.